So I'm going to switch gears here and just give a quick introduction to this talk here tonight. A guy named Mark Withington, who I know some of you know, is the person who started Boston PHP way back in 2002. And he told me something interesting way back when. He said, and he started it with a few people in a coffee shop, and he said, well, one of the reasons why I like doing this group or running this group is that I get to learn about the stuff that I want to learn about. Now that's not always the case these days. We have a broad range of topics that we talk about, but this topic tonight in particular is one that I really want to know about. So as a PHP developer, why should I use WordPress, right? WordPress is one of those things, in my opinion, where you have a broad range of skill sets who are using it. Somebody could use WordPress without knowing a line of PHP, right? Other people can modify WordPress and make it do crazy things that you may never expect WordPress to be able to do. And that's what I'm really excited to hear. I want to know why, if I'm a PHP developer and I'm comfortable writing an application from start to finish, what's WordPress going to do for me? So I'm really excited to have Steven here. He works for a company called Oomph. They're a shop that does work for big-time clients. They have offices in both Providence and Boston. So without more delay, welcome, Steven.
Hello, my name is Steven. Today I'm here to talk to you about why PHP developers should leverage WordPress. The way I decided to approach this talk, I wanted to make sure that I could cover as much information as possible. I'm working with WordPress for somewhere in the vicinity of 5+ years. I learned a lot of things the hard way, and rather than just pick a narrow topic and show a bunch of code, what I tried to do today was cover as much as possible and make lots and lots of links. So with that in mind, I would just like to stress you don't need to take notes, they're on the screen. I will make these slides available at the end. And on that note, let's get going. First off, as I mentioned, my name is Steven. I work at Oomph. I'm a senior WordPress developer over there at the Long Wharf office. I've been doing that for about 2 years now. Before, I was doing freelance work. I was kind of moving around the country a lot at the time. It was a really good way for me to keep doing that and be flexible. At a certain point, though, I hit a limit. I could no longer work on projects that were getting any bigger or any better. So when I moved to Boston, I took a look at Oomph, and they do some enterprise level work, which we'll talk about here in a minute, and it turned out to be a perfect fit. I'm also a plugin author. Apologize about that. It's actually a kind of a sea blue, but it's kind of showing up navy black here. So I'm also a member of the Boston WordPress group. We have a meetup in this very room last Monday of every month. It's one of the larger WordPress groups in the nation. If you like what you hear today, I recommend that you check it out. There's one next Monday. And lastly, I'm a proud Texan. Don't know why, don't agree with most of the people there, but I like it. And WordPress is from Texas. Just like to throw that in. Much better? Contrast? This is some of my coworkers. I think we have almost everybody here. This picture was taken out on Cape Cod this summer. We took a week to have a retreat out there. We pretty much focused on internal projects. We had a really good time, and you can ask me more about that if you would like. So at Oomph, what we do is typically, we're about a 20-person shop, with about 15 out of 20 of those people being developers. We're not typically design heavy. The other 25% is made up of managers, CTO, CO, etc. Most of the work we end up doing is WordPress work. We are not solely WordPress. I would say probably about 80 to 90% of our projects are on WordPress. Probably about most of the other 10% is on Drupal, and then every once in a while a mobile app, some other PHP. And then we have a few guys in our group that are kind of good at one thing, but it's not the focus of what we do. Some of the clients that we actually work with on WordPress, you have CNN. We work with NBC Sports, Nessun here in Boston, actually in Cambridge, and high traffic stuff. So it goes to show that you can use WordPress for high traffic, enterprise level clients. So I broke this into two parts. First one, I'm going to talk about why I think you should use WordPress. There's going to be very little code in this, generally just talking. I'm going to discuss some of the pros and cons, some what I think are the rumors that I've heard over the years. I'd like to compare WordPress to maybe some of the other things that you've heard about, Drupal being the main one. I'd like to explain what's in it for PHP developers, and that is probably really the focus of this talk. I really am looking to appeal to someone that is either getting into PHP or has a lot of experience with PHP. And then, also in this section, I'd like to talk about job opportunities. Those are quite extensive, and we do have an entire section on that in a little bit. For the second part, I'll talk more about the development fundamentals. These are things like coding practices, how you author a plugin and theme correctly. There are wrong ways to do these things. Talk about the community a little bit, and just generally make some tips, recommendations that I think be valuable to a good number of people here. So first off, is there anybody in the room who has no experience with WordPress whatsoever or has never heard of it? Okay, very good. So this is a little bit of a confusing topic. It's actually two different things, separated by top-level domain names. So you have .org. This is the open source software. You can download this for free anywhere. And you have WordPress.com, which is actually a hosting service that uses the WordPress software. There's actually a difference, and feel free to check out any of the blue links at the bottom. The ones especially on support.wordpress.com do an excellent job of kind of providing a more detailed view of these things. So on WordPress.org, so you download the WordPress software. It's almost generally a LAMP stack. So what you're looking at is Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. There are exceptions to that. WordPress.com actually runs Nginx. I think they get a little bit better performance out of it, but 95%, probably 99% of the WordPress installs in the world are still running Apache. It is freely available and redistributable under the GPL license. It's also highly extensible. Anybody who wants to add on, contribute, can put it out there, and then it's up to you to decide if you want to adopt what they've done. And the latest version has been downloaded over, I think, 30 million times. Let's see where we're at. All right, that's getting cut off on me a little bit, but that's 29,800,000. And that's only version 3.5, which is the latest one, so it's pretty popular. WordPress.com. So as mentioned earlier, this runs the WordPress.org software. It is a hosting service. So rather than going there and downloading something, this is where you would go to create a blog. You can do this for absolutely free. It is a for-profit product by a company known as Automatic. Automatic was started by Matt Mullenweg, who was the original founder of the WordPress project, I want to say back in 2003 or so. Pretty much it's the exact same software. They do have some special libraries that they run on there because they are massive in scale, but mostly you're looking at the same code that you can download for free. Customization, you don't really have the liberties that you do if you download and host it yourself. WordPress.com is actually one WordPress install running thousands of blogs. There are not one set of WordPress installs for each blog. It's all one gigantic installation. Because of that, if there are any problems in performance or anything, they kind of affect the whole network. So what they allow you to do here is a little bit more restricted. They do have add-on options. You can purchase premium themes, plugins. They will also host your own domain for you. If those are things that you're interested in, those are opt-in options. It is the world's largest WordPress installation. They're guessing about 69 million sites on there. I'm going to try to pull up a slide here that actually was one of my favorite in the presentation. So this is also getting cut off, unfortunately. But the number is not as important as what I would like to demonstrate down here on the map. So this map is showing a real-time activity that is occurring on WordPress.com at the moment, with the white being people creating new content, post, the green dots are comments, and likes. And this is all going on right now. As you can see, it's pretty active. And also, on a good month, we're seeing about 369 million page views per month throughout WordPress.com. WordPress.com VIP. This is where I've been spending most of my time for the last couple years. This is a service offered by the folks at Automatic as well. WordPress.com VIP is an enterprise solution for the clients that we mentioned earlier. You have companies like NBC Sports, TED, if you guys are familiar with that. TechCrunch is a very popular one. CNN, Time, Dow Jones. And then I mentioned Nessun is also one of our clients. So this is actually running on the same WordPress installation as the blog that you can go sign up for free. Of course, it's actually intended to be a lot more scalable. We have people that get pretty much close to, I think, 1 million hits per month, and it's running the exact same WordPress software you can download. So there's some good things about WordPress, make me happy. As Matt mentioned, barrier for entry is very low. You actually don't have to be able to know how to do a single line of PHP, and you can still get involved. PHP is fantastic knowledge to walk in with. In fact, it's pretty much what this talk is about, is I'm trying to encourage people who know PHP but maybe don't have exposure to WordPress to check it out. It is extremely widely adopted, unquestionably the most popular CMS. And if not sure you consider CMS, we'll also address this in the future. Out-of-the-box functionality. Basically, when you download WordPress and you install it, you get a product. As soon as you install it, you get something that looks very much like this. So it opens up, and this is basically what I did earlier today. I created a new WordPress installation. I named it, and it took me about, I would say, 10 minutes to set this up. I'm not going to run through the installation project and process in great details. I will link you to an instruction manual that is very comprehensive, and you can follow that. I think it's pretty straightforward. As WordPress.org claims, it is both free and priceless. It is definitely some of the best open source software you can get for the money, and leave it at that. Fortunately, there are some things that do hurt per WordPress brand. WordPress suffers from being pigeonholed. When people hear the word, they almost always think about blogs. You can do so much more with it than that. I actually think of it more like an application framework and a lot less of a blog software. E-commerce is one of the things that I have not been a big fan of in the past. No tool is great for every job. Now, on that note, I will encourage you to take a look at 2 new e-commerce products that have come out in the last few years. I have been hearing good things. That would be WooCommerce and Cart66. But don't hold me to it, I don't have personal experience. One of the other problems with the WordPress community, you get what I call knowledge pollution. You have a problem and you're looking to address in WordPress, what do? You go Google it, right? One of the first things that pops up is going to probably be Stack Exchange. I love Stack Exchange, it's a great place to get ideas. Unfortunately, some of the code in there can be very old, can be poorly written. It's not necessarily the best place to do your WordPress learning. I think of it more as a guideline for inspiring ideas, and not necessarily something that I would prefer to copy and paste chunks of code out of. WordPress.com is backwards compatible. That means if you have a site that you set up back in 2004, if you have maintained upgrades and done things the way they should be done, you can actually run the exact same code that you wrote back then now. Unfortunately, that does slow down the growth period, and there's a little bit more work in making sure that those things all function from now to the future. WordPress myths. So these are things that I've heard over the last few years that I do not necessarily agree with, and I'm gonna try to make a case for. WordPress is only for blogs. Once again, I'm about to point out a few examples. It's so much more than that, and this is actually one of my favorite things to talk about. Another rumor is that WordPress is only for beginners. I think Matt kind of touched on this. WordPress is for everybody. If you are a brand new web developer, it's a great place to start. I've been in this business for about 10 years, and I still find challenges. The program or the platform, the software, it grows with you. It's not stagnant. There's thousands of people contributing to WordPress, and it's evolving all the time. WordPress applications. So I mentioned that I don't really like to think of WordPress as a blog software. What I do think of it is a software that comes with a blog application in its default configuration, which is what I showed you earlier. You can install it in 10 minutes, and you have a blog. You can go into the administrative tool. Don't need to know any code. Just put it right there on the screen. I also like to think of it kind of like Legos. WordPress comes with a general guideline. Don't have to make what's on the box, and sometimes it's more fun not to. All right, I'm actually presenting at a different resolution than I was when I first tested this, so bear with me if these links don't work out exactly as I'm hoping. We'll try to work with that. So these are examples of things that are not blogs being built with WordPress. The first one I'm going to show you is called Capsule. This is a project that came out around March by a company in Colorado known as Crowd Favorite. They do some really great work on WordPress. The idea here is much like, for those of you familiar with GitHub, it's the similar idea to a gist. It's a code vault, if you will. So here's an example of this. So unlike a typical WordPress installation where you would edit your content on the back end, what you do here is it all loads through AJAX calls. It does syntax highlighting. It basically follows all the rules that you would expect out of an editor. You can do tabs. You don't have to worry about spaces. It's pretty. It's very useful. Just something that I kind of wanted to touch on because it's definitely not a blog. And we will be back here to look at code samples in a little while. The second one is a website known as Happy Tables. This is a product out of England, a company there named Human Made. This is using WordPress as a service. They don't actually distribute any code. And what they're doing is they make website creation service for people in the restaurant business. So the idea here is they are doing somewhat similar to what WordPress.com is using for blogs. They're doing with restaurant websites. Yeah, resolutions. I apologize. Check them out later. This is actually a really cool project. So they have a monthly fee. So what you do, you're a restaurant owner. You go there. You pay the $9 a month, and then you can make a WordPress site using what they've done with WordPress. So there's common things. So what they've done for their customers is they've added things like menus. They built out a menu system so that if you're a restaurant owner, you can go into their tool. You can set up your menu. Don't have to know any programming. And you can get your menu on your website and as quick as you can type it almost. The last one is we've already touched on. It is WordPress.com. It is worth mentioning again. It is gigantic. And then lastly, actually it was supposed to be like this. And lastly, this presentation. So some of you may recognize the slides. I'm using Reveal.js, which is one of the JavaScript presentation libraries that's available right now. And then I've packaged that with WordPress. So what you actually can see here, I do need to change the resolution. Bear with me for one moment, I apologize. If I don't get this working in the next minute or so, we're going to just go back.
If you can't change the resolution, then this is not a problem.
I can do that. And in fact, in the sake of time, let's just go ahead and do that.
You want to
Sure.
Is it not coming up?
Well, this one was 720p when we did the test run. I can move on. I think I'm just going to move on. That's fine.
Okay.
All right, so we can just zoom out. I think we're going to just continue on this way. So these are all of my slides for the presentation that appear here on the front end. Now this is all the presentation layer being done by Reveal in the JavaScript, while the back end is being handled with a customized version of WordPress. It worked better when I ran through this at home. That's how it always goes, right? Okay, here we go, finally. All right. So what I've done here is I've added presentations to taxonomy. We'll talk about that later, as well as slides. And I can drag and drop these slides around, edit them in real time, and then bring them here to share with you today. It's just another example of something you can do with WordPress that you would not probably have expected. All right, another myth. WordPress is not secure. This is one you hear a lot about. And it really depends on your perspective. The core WordPress code that you get from WordPress.org, that's pretty stable. I actually don't worry about that at all. It's an open source. Anybody who wants to go look at it can look at it, and they've been looking at it for a really long time. Not to say that maybe the occasional bug doesn't get introduced, but it get resolved really, really fast. Where you do run into WordPress hacks, problems with security, poorly developed plugins. They are not written in the same standards that the actual core code is. They don't use proper practices, they don't sanitize their database inputs. They basically set themselves up, and if you put one of these on your site, that's all it really takes. So be wary, keep in mind that it is what you make it. As a general rule of thumb, if you don't need the plugin, don't use it. More plugins is not necessarily bad, but it does open up problem potential. And we'll get into a little bit more about plugins. WordPress versus Drupal. This is a topic I really don't like to talk about, especially in Boston. However, what I've done is I'm going to piggyback off of John Ekman, who's a web developer here at SidePoint in Boston. He gave a presentation last year at WordCamp Boston entitled, "Why the Heck Isn't WordPress a CMS?" In this presentation, he does a really, really great job of not only comparing WordPress to Drupal, he compares the communities and also the founders. Definitely worth taking a look at. I guess the leaving point would be both WordPress and Drupal are good in their own rights. I do not claim to be an expert in Drupal. My exposure has been primarily with WordPress. I have used it, and I do have respect for it. And anybody who tells you differently is being a little bit biased. No tool is perfect for anything. My experience just happens to be with WordPress, and I'm going to promote that. However, when it comes to popularity, WordPress kind of wins. So the red line at the bottom, for those of you in the back, the red line is charting Drupal, the blue line is charting WordPress, and the yellow one in the middle is charting Joomla. When I started back around the year 2000 doing my very first web development in PHP, picked up a software called Mambo. Don't know if anybody has ever heard of that. It eventually turned into Joomla. I have not thought about it in about 10 years. WordPress has occupied that place in my brain, and I have no qualms with that. Why should you use WordPress? LangStack is established. PHP is around. I don't worry about PHP either. Node's a little bit newer. If I was going to make a business decision, I'd feel a lot more comfortable with a Linux Apache MySQL PHP stack. It's a free set of tools. Why not use it? They're true, it's good stuff. Additionally, you can make lots of money with WordPress if you can figure out exactly how to make that work for you. I do have a slide about that later. It's also one of my favorite topics. Everybody in here has an opportunity to make some money if you so desire. And then the last one is the community. WordPress is a fantastic community. It's very large, which leads to lots and lots of people. Communicating on forums, IRC, through the WordPress meetup. It's a very welcoming crowd. Anybody who's not checked out one of the meetups, WordCamp, something like this, I strongly encourage it. You rarely walk away without learning someone, or learning something, or meeting someone that is knowledgeable. Making money. So, how do we do it? There's a couple different ways. Many people sell themes. You do have to be a little bit cautious here. All PHP that you try to sell, it assumes the GPL license. WordPress states that you cannot repackage it through the GPL license. This means that you can't sell it, you can't modify it, and then sell it. You can modify it and then distribute it freely. So this creates a little bit of a problem for people that want to sell their themes. And one thing you can do, however, is any image assets. Anything that is not PHP is not GPL. So your README, not GPL. The pictures, the icons you use, anything you can put in there, make your product valuable is not redistributable, and anybody who does would be breaking or causing a violation. Plugins fall into the same area. People have been experimenting with something called the freemium model, so where they will release a plugin version that you can download for free and try out, and then opt in to buy a version that has a few more options. Pretty much, that is on the per plugin basis. Software as a service. This would be pointing at WordPress.com. Also, Happy Tables, which we mentioned earlier. These are companies that are not selling the software. They're only allowing you to sign up online, and then you get a service for that, and it is usually on a monthly recurring model. Another great way to make money, which is how I did it for a very long time, freelancing and consulting. This can be a little rough in the beginning. At the very beginning, you really have to fight a bunch of WordPress developers because the community is so large. There's some competition out there. After about the first year, though, I started getting referrals, and I got to a point where I had to start turning down work. If you like flexibility, like working from home, I would take a look at this. And if anybody has any questions about this, they'd like to catch me after, I'd be more than happy to discuss it with you. And lastly, you get a real job. And what I mean here is a 9 to 5. WordPress is kind of cool in the aspect that you have a lot of companies that are not necessarily that 9 to 5 rigid model. For example, Oomph company I work with, we all work at home on Wednesdays. Gives you a chance to go to the doctor if you want. We have a policy. You get your stuff done, and then you have the flexibility that you need. And I have to commute 2 days in a row. Some perks like this make it really nice. Automatic, for example, is a completely distributed company. They just meet up wherever they want when it's time. So there are careers that you can find, and still get your 401k, but you still don't have to still play exactly inside the rules or by the rules. So what does WordPress offer developers? It gives you a framework for common task. There's a series of APIs straight out of core that you can use to make all sorts of websites. And the community support, as mentioned earlier, is excellent, support.wordpress.org. Coding standards. This can be something you need to learn as well as something that's potential benefit to you. Once everybody starts using the coding standards and everybody starts writing their PHP in the same way, it becomes a lot easier to look at. You can read code if it's exactly written like you would write it. This is something that I also did not do for a large part of my freelance career, and I strongly regret. Anybody who's just getting started or anybody who's not following coding standards, I strongly recommend taking a look at those. And then lastly, you have revenue potential. So what do you get with WordPress? I said it was a framework, so what are you getting? You get user management. Anybody who's ever tried to build a CMS or something from the ground up, it's actually a bit of work to get this working. User management, passwords, security, logins, friendships, things like this. WordPress handles a lot of this for you, not with the friendships directly. We can do that with a plugin. But it basically creates a user system for you. If you used WordPress for nothing other than the user system, I would say you're probably still doing okay. You still saved a bunch of time, and you probably still have a good product. Content management. So in the blog model, most of what people do is write articles, post pages. WordPress will keep track of the revisions for you. So suppose that you have more than one person in your website making changes, and maybe one of them is a little bit newer than you would prefer, and they made a mistake. You can roll these things back, and this gets built into any type of content that you create with post types in WordPress, and we will discuss later. Comes with the media manager. You should never have to directly reference files from the file system unless they're for the theme. What I mean by that is if you are writing an article, WordPress calls these posts, so I'm going to use them that terminology. If you're writing a post and you want to include a picture, WordPress has a nice little button in the back end. You basically click on, you upload your file, and then it pops right in there. This ties in with the WYSIWYG editor. What you see is what you get. When you are editing a WordPress post or one of the various content types, you can actually type it in just like you would Microsoft Word. You can expand on this, but if you're not a developer, you can still use WordPress and be very good with it. And this is definitely not an inclusive list. I wish I could touch on all of it, but I will touch on a few more of these. Take a look on your own. Something also WordPress is good for is it plays well with others. You get Backbone and underscore JS packaged right in there. jQuery, jQuery UI come packaged with WordPress. You can still use the CDNs if you choose, but you do have an option of using the version that is included with WordPress. And it also comes with jcrop, which is used by the media manager, and color picker, which is a JavaScript interface for selecting a color from like an RGB grid. It also contains some older libraries, SimplePy, which we use to parse RSS XML feeds, Thickbox, which is a modal JavaScript plugin. This one's a little bit of a sore point. Most people prefer jQuery modal these days. This one's been around for a long time, and this kind of fits in with that backwards compatibility I was talking about earlier. I still use it. TinyMCE. This is the WYSIWYG editor. This is what allows you to directly interact with your WordPress post as though you would Microsoft Word, or we'll stick with Microsoft product for now. Getting started. All right, so this is going to start getting into how do I actually use all this stuff. Sounds good? So how do I do it? Well, first off, you need to install WordPress. There's the link. There's a great article. It's actually pretty simple. If nobody's done that, I'm sure that actually I saw in the comments that there are people in the room that would be willing to help you out with that, myself included, after the presentation, time permitting. The codex. This is WordPress's instruction manual. You definitely want to take a look here. You want to read through the coding standards, and you want to take a glance at the API documentation. These are those tools that I had mentioned in the previous slide. You want to take a look at something called WP Query, and we'll discuss all of these things in greater detail. And a point that I really like to drive home is to learn from the core code. I had mentioned earlier you might want to stay away from Stack Exchange. What you can do is look at WordPress.org, download the software, and take a look at it. If you find something that you want to do, chances are that there may be an example of it either in a well-written plugin or in WordPress core. I like to look at core to learn how to do things because you know it's right. On the note for looking through core, tools like grep, ACK, or even some of the GUI IDEs that you may be using have like a search all files. One great thing that comes out of the coding standards is that you can, if you know what you're looking for in WordPress, the name of the function, for example, you can search for the string of function, one space, and then that function name. That is consistent throughout the WordPress software. You can quickly find what you're looking for. So more on the codex. This is available at codex.wordpress.org. This is mostly pretty awesome. Learned a lot from here. Unfortunately, it can be outdated. This is not de facto information here. Use it with caution. Now, some of the more prominent articles, I will point you at a few of those in a moment, are kept up to date. And for the most part, I would say that the thing is up to date. Just be aware that it cannot be from time to time. It is community maintained, which means that if you find an error and you would like to correct it, please do. The rest of the community will appreciate it. And it's a fantastic way to contribute, even if you're not necessarily on the programming side of things. So coding standards. WordPress defines 4 coding standards for you. You have PHP, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And those are all links to the coding standard page for the related technology. We're going to take a quick look at the PHP coding standard. I'm not actually going to walk you through the standards. What I'd like to do is just show you a piece of PHP code and just kind of point at some of the things that we use in the coding standards. Okay. Some things that are kind of unusual to other PHP softwares. Anytime you have a variable name, inside parentheses, separate it with spaces on both sides. This does end up with more white space. When you have functions with lots of parameters, it actually does help with readability. Anytime you have an array, you want to separate the items in the array by commas, and single quotes are preferred. I find, this actually, I'm not sure as a code standard, is kind of a preference of mine. Single quotes in PHP do not get interpreted, so PHP will not waste time looking for variables inside of it, whereas with double quotes it will. You always want to use the closing brace on the same line that the function is declared on. That's just for consistency. I know some people prefer to put it on the next line. But in the WordPress standard, we always try to throw it at the end there. As a general rule of thumb, you want to namespace everything. You want to prefix your class names. In this case that we're looking at, you have I1 celebrities. This is more appropriately named than just celebrities. What if I was installing a plugin down the road 2-3 years from now, or maybe I'm no longer working on the project and someone has assumed my work? They could also have a plugin that is using celebrities as a name, and you're going to get a parse error, it's going to crash, and you're going to have a heck of a time trying to figure out where that problem originated. The WordPress APIs, so the toolbox. If you follow that link at the top, there's excellent documentation, all of them. There's roughly 20. WordPress comes with some of the APIs are things like the database API. This allows you to make queries to the database. For example, if I'm looking for a series of articles, I can say get post, category equals, and then uncategorized. just as the default. That is all the PHP that I have to spit out. It will handle my SQL queries for me. And best of all, there are caching routines that are built into those functions if you choose to take advantage of them. Most important thing to know with the APIs is you need to know that they're there. You don't need to be 100% familiar with them. There are some of them that I rarely touch. Ones that I would definitely take a look at are the plugin API, the database API. HTTP API is pretty good if you're communicating with any third-party services. You basically just need to know that they're there and be able to reference them later on. WP Query. This is one of the most important articles in the entire codex. This is a class used to set up a global object on every single WordPress page that you will ever view. It does not matter if it's an archive, a page, a post, custom post type, it does not matter. You have one of these objects hanging out, loaded very early in the process on every single page. By using the WP Query object and taking a look at the information that you will find at that link, it shows you how you can intercept that query very early on and actually edit the material that will display on your page before the page loads. There are other ways of doing this. In the past, there's a function called query post, which you will see there. That is deprecated. That's a very old function. You will still see it everywhere. Try to stay away from that. Actually, don't try, do. Stay away from that. The caching mechanisms are not in there. It's just very dirty. And worst of all, it does not take advantage of the default query. You think, well, maybe that's not so bad. I'm missing out on one SQL query per page. Some of those are really actually pretty complicated. They have subqueries, joins. They can be slow. Why would you want to do that if you're not going to use the information? It's definitely better to take a look at this article and learn how to do it. Use your bandwidth the best you can. Best practices. So something you don't want to do is hack at core. That's generally not a good thing to do. You always want to use the coding standards, as mentioned earlier. Security best practices. You want to namespace everything, which is the I1 celebrities example that we talked about. You always want to use WP Query, and you want to keep an eye on your log. If you want to look more into the log, there's a file called WP config that is in the very root of your WordPress installation. There is a definition in there, WP debug. You set that to true, and that will allow you to begin your logging. If anybody else would also, I do not have, unfortunately, I did not put links up here. If anybody else would like information on that, I can also help out. Seriously, do not hack at core. This is a meme that went around the internet in the WordPress community a couple years ago, but it's one that's still very popular. Here's why you don't want to do this. Let's say that you are a startup company and you're trying to make a product with WordPress. You hire your team of developers, you set them loose, and they can't find a plugin that supports what you want them to do. They come back to you and they say, hey, WordPress is not allowing me to do this. I need to alter the way that WordPress works. Well, now you have a problem. One, you can't deploy that. You'll never be able to update WordPress again. You are totally killing your ability to ever upgrade to the next version of WordPress, because if you did, next time you hit the update button, it's going to overwrite everything that got put into core. It's just a big waste of money. Another, you got to rewrite it if you want to use the product, and that's not where anybody wants to be. There's an argument that you cannot do everything you need to with WordPress. I actually find this to be mostly false. WordPress has a action and filter system we'll talk about in a moment. Basically, there's a way to interact with core and extend it beyond the functionalities that it comes with. As time goes on, more and more of these opportunities to interact with core present themselves into WordPress. If you ever find yourself in a position where you feel like you have to hack at core, the only way that I would recommend that you do that would be by adding one of these action and filters into the core. That is going to result in a one code line change that you can now interact with at the point that you want. I would then also recommend to make an argument for getting that filter moved into the actual project itself. And we'll talk more about how to get involved with the core project towards the end. Namespacing, always do it. We kind of touched on this earlier. It's just a very, very important thing to do. Also, JavaScript, this is also something you should watch out for. Anybody who works with a lot of JavaScript knows that generic naming your functions will pretty much break things almost every time. Validation and sanitization. Now, this is the practice that you need to pay attention to if you're worried about security. If you have any sort of forms that you're working with on your website, you should pay special attention to this slide. WordPress provides validation, sanitization, and escaping mechanisms for handling your data. Generally speaking, escaping is a filter that you run your data through on the way to the database. When it comes out of the database. Validation is checking your data. Suppose that your form is asking for a phone number. You want to make sure that it's a phone number and that it's not a string of acrylic characters, for example. You also don't want anybody entering SQL into your form. By escaping, validating, and sanitizing your data, you can prevent SQL injection attacks, which I would say or most hacks that are done on WordPress are usually done this way. Nonces. So WordPress provides a way to verify that the form that you have submitted and are getting back contains the data and that it actually originated from your website and not from a third party. Yes? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's a number used only once. So basically anytime that WordPress has a form, you have an opportunity to generate a nonce value. It's just a string. You can think of it as like a 5-digit number. And it's going to be unique for that time that it loads. So when you submit your form, you're also submitting this unique number along with the form. When you get it back, now your server knows to check that, and if that number does not match what you had in the form originally, you don't process it. And follow the link if you're interested in finding out more information like that. The Codex article on nonces is pretty thorough. Plugin and themes. This is an area of WordPress that most people that have been working with it for a while are very familiar with. Plugins and themes allow you to extend the functionality on more kind of a individual feature level, especially with plugins. Things like maybe a calendar tool would be a plugin. It's not going to be an entire software like you would find with some of the examples in the applications that we looked at earlier. Themes, and generally speaking, are your presentation layer. They allow you to alter your appearance. You can have the same plugins running on many, many different sites, and they can look completely different depending on which themes you have. There are thousands of themes out there that are completely free, and there are also ones that are paid options. I do encourage looking at the free ones. Not that I'm trying to undermine the theme selling business. I would just take a look at that initially, get your feet wet. Recommended plugins. So this is definitely not an all-inclusive list. However, it is a question that I get very frequently. People ask me, hey Steven, what is the best plugin that I can use to do this task? I don't have an answer for all of those, so I'm just going to tell you about some of the ones that I use regularly, like these are in my top 20 for sure. Jetpack. Jetpack is a bunch of things. It allows you to interact with WordPress.com on your own private blog. So say you went to WordPress.org, you downloaded your own software, you decided to host it on your own. Well, now you're detached from that community. You can't interact with likes, for example. Your comment system is going to be independent. Jetpack will bridge that gap for you and allow you to interact with the rest of the WordPress.com users without having to be on that service. Caching. If you are expecting lots of page views, caching practices is absolutely mandatory for scalability. There are two really good plugins for this, WP Super Cache and W3 Total Cache. There's a debate in the community about which was better. I tend to lean towards W3, but I definitely do not have any problems with the other one. I just have a lack of experience. For SEO, I like add meta tags. Now this one is very, very simple. It's also not very well known. Usually what you'll see is all-in-one SEO, which does a pretty good job. I find I get better results out of add meta tags, and I think it's a little bit easier to set up. If you're absolutely gung-ho set on all-in-one SEO, stick with it. Social network in a box, BuddyPress. This is another product of Automatic, or it's open source as well, but this is a social networking layer that sits on top of WordPress. This is how you turn your WordPress blog into your own version of Facebook. It comes with an extension on members, users, so you can form things like friendships, as mentioned earlier. You get things like a news feed. There's another plugin made by the same gentleman, John James Jacoby, who's a former Providence resident, known as BBPress, and these two have kind of joined forces lately. BBPress is your community forums. If anybody's familiar with like vBulletin, any sort of community forums that you see. Generally not BBPress, but this is how you assume the same type of functionality with your own software. E-commerce, as I mentioned earlier, I have not in the past been a big fan. I do hear lots and lots of great things about Magento. I also do not have experience with it. But you know, WordPress is not fantastic for everything. Maybe this is one of those things. Maybe it's just my opinion. I also would encourage you to look at Cart66 in WooCommerce. Developer tools. So these are a couple of plugins. If you're going to touch a single line of PHP and work on your own WordPress site, these are invaluable. The debug bar plugin will allow you to inspect the log content that you would normally have to open up a text file and keep scrolling down, or tail to keep track of. With the debug bar, I can go up here and I can see what queries are being executed. That WP query object that I mentioned earlier that's set up at the beginning of every page. You can view items that exist in the current object cache. If you were using caching, you can inspect the request. A lot of goodies. Now, some of these things are actually coming out of the debug bar extender, which is also an excellent plugin. It does depend on the debug bar. And lastly, the developer plugin for the debug bar as well. The developer plugin is actually not so much a plugin as it is a plugin loader. You can actually get both debug bar extender, and a number of other ones through the WordPress, through the developer plugin. It's a little bit hard to find when you're looking for the plugins. It's by automatic. That's how you know you found the right one. Searching for developer, for some reason, this does not pull up the first result. So this is that WordPress install that we looked at straight out of the box that I set up earlier today. I have included the developer plugin on it. And this is the admin of WordPress. I have not talked about this so much. When you're here in the admin, the very first time you install the developer plugin, it's going to ask you 3 questions, or 1 question, 3 possible answers. Are you using this as a self-hosted solution? Are you using it on WordPress.com? Or are you using it on VIP? In this instance, I'm using it on my own, and I'm using it, we'll say, for a theme. So these are your plugins that come. They don't actually come with the developer. It's going to install these things on a per request basis. I don't want to touch on all of them because I don't necessarily have the time to get into it all. But these are all great. Every single one of these is recommended if you need it. Do beware if you turn on the Pig Latin application, or the Pig Latin plugin. It can be confusing. This will translate your entire site into Pig Latin, which also makes correcting it difficult. There is a purpose for, though. WordPress is international, multilingual. All right, it supports multiple languages. Anyway, if you want to test that and not necessarily be able to speak the language that you're trying to translate into, maybe someone else is going to do that for you, throwing on Pig Latin is a quick way to make sure that programmatically that you are running the translations correctly. So plugin development. Actions filters, custom post types, custom taxonomies. These are 3 things that you will use pretty frequently. The last 2, custom taxonomies and custom post types, have not been around quite as long. Definitely not since the beginning. Actions and filters is something that has existed for quite a long time. All 3 are super powerful. So actions. So these are basically an opportunity to insert your own code into the WordPress core. It's your gateway to modifying functionality that comes with WordPress without hacking at core. There's a list of these at the action reference from the codex. It is not complete, but there are a lot of them in there, and pretty much anything that I ever need to use you'll find in here. I'm going to take a quick look at what an action looks like. So at the bottom, the very last line, do action publish post. This is a line of code that exists in WordPress core. The code block above that is one that I authored earlier today, just as an example. And what I want to do is every time that I'm publishing a post, I want to run this function that will send out that email. The way that I do this is I create a plugin, I add function, my function name, and then I'll add it to the action. So the add action clause is actually where you connect your function name to the publish post action. If this interests you, there are priorities, and you can pass more than one variable. It does change the syntax a little bit, but it's basically the same idea. Filters. So filters are very, very similar to hooks. Very, very similar to actions. The difference is they usually use these to modify a value. If there was an array of usernames in WordPress core and you wanted to sort those alphabetically, you would use a filter to do this. You would look for the code that generates that in core, and then you would look for the hook where you can hook into that. It's usually near the end, right before it will spit it out. You can think of filters as always returning a value. So you're going to take information that you already have, you're going to do something, and then return it to core where it will be processed. Well, actually, on that note, you can add plugins and filters, you can add actions and filters to your own plugins as well. I do encourage that. It allows other developers to piggyback on your plugin, and it actually could increase the adoption of your plugin. Something to consider. Custom post types. So what these are units of content. WordPress comes with 5 of these by default. You probably only really have to deal with 2 or 3 of them. Post, pages, revisions, attachments, and I believe navigational menus. So these are all handled the exact same way. They are the exact same table. They have the same columns. If you want to add your own unit of content, say that you were writing a website about turtles, and each turtle that you were talking about had a name, you could create a custom post type for each one of these turtles. It does not have to be post. It can literally be anything. Custom taxonomies. So taxonomy is basically a way to classify custom post types. Most common and well-known examples of these are categories and tags. These are not necessarily an entity on their own. I think of them more as a grouping. So for example, you can have 3 different articles post of the post type, and they can all belong to the same category. And we'll take a quick peek at what that looks like in WordPress. So I actually set this one up as a class, which is a little bit more code heavy. The block you should pay attention to is right here. If you go to the custom taxonomy page that was available through the codex, it will show you these. This is not actually all the parameters that you can pass, but this is how I set up the presentation in the example I showed you earlier of how I built my slides. Slides themselves are actually post types or units of content, and the presentation itself is a taxonomy, meaning that all the slides belong to this presentation. Theme development. This is an area that most people find pretty fun to get into. It's a little bit more visually rewarding than some of the plugin development. It really depends on your preference. There are 2 ways to get into this, or there's 2 right ways to get into this. And what I used to do is I used to go download a free WordPress theme from wordpress.org, and then I would just hack it. I would take it, turn it into whatever I needed it to be, and maybe sometimes sell it, depends, to a client for work. It was good, but not what you're supposed to do. The other thing you can do, or what you should do, is do what's called child theming. Child theming is a way to use 2 themes. The first one would be the theme that you downloaded from wordpress.org that you liked, and then your theme would be the child theme. You can think of it as a parent-child relationship. When you enable the child theme, it will execute everything that the parent theme does. Then you can extend, much like you can use plugins to interact with core, you can use your child theme to interact with your parent theme. What this allows for is the update of the themes. Themes get updated just like plugins and core. This gives you an opportunity to stay with the current version of the theme that you've adopted and still keep your changes. It's good practice. One other note on this is that 2012, 2013, WordPress includes these. This is what we saw in my WordPress fresh install that we looked at earlier. These themes, the ones that come with WordPress, are designed to show off what's new in WordPress that year. The 2012 theme is intended to show off what was new for that version of WordPress. Because they're more of a presentation show-off type thing, they're kind of bulky. They have stuff in there that you won't necessarily use, and you'll actually spend more time fighting it than if you went about it by the second method. This is my preferred way of creating themes. Something I hadn't heard of until recently. It's called a starter theme. Underscores is one released by the folks at Automatic. It is a WordPress starter theme. What it is lots and lots of functionality with 0 presentation. If you were to go download the _s theme into your blog and turn it on, is going to look like a text document. You get absolutely nothing visually appealing about it. What you do get is a 1,000-hour head start on your JavaScript, PHP, routines that are really common. Think of it as scaffolding or maybe a boilerplate for a theme. I would recommend that if you're going to do this, rather than forking it from GitHub, if you go to underscores.me, you can choose the name you want, call it My Theme. You go to underscores.me, you type in My Theme, and it'll actually generate a theme file for you that you can download in a zip file. And it will actually have all of the default functions namespaced for you with your theme name. Saves lots and lots of time, and it's a great way to learn how to structure your theme correctly. And there's already so much code in there that you can use to look at the standards and whatnot. It's an excellent starting place. This is what we do at OOMP, by the way. So if this all sounds good to you, lots and lots of ways to get involved. You don't necessarily have to be a developer. Many, many ways to contribute to the WordPress community/project. You can actually work on core. This is intimidating for me personally as well as most people. I did dip my toe in here and do something with this earlier in the year. Not nearly as terrifying as it seemed. My fear, I think, was rejection of code, I guess. Nobody wants to submit something that they don't feel is worthy. And it turned out that that's an unfounded belief. You should always try to get involved in any way you can and allow people to help you along the way. They do provide great community support. You should do this as well. If you find somebody in the community in this room that does not know everything that you know, or maybe knows something different about the same topic as what you know, help them out. It's the best way to learn. I love FaceTime. I think it's invaluable. I would rather talk to somebody than read a Codex article. Develop plugins and themes. While you can put business models around these, lots and lots of them are free. The plugin that I have is actually for BuddyPress, which is free. I released my plugin free as well. It's just something that it's a good little way to get back. I mean, I use WordPress for free, and it's more valuable to me than any of the time I spent in college. It's made me a heck of a lot more money. Design UI and UX. If you're more like doing the design side of it, or maybe you spend your time in Photoshop, there's lots of ways to contribute here. WordPress has a look and feel. It has the 2012 themes. You can interact with core in this way. If you speak multiple languages, translations are a really big thing that we need help with, as well as accessibility. One thing that WordPress does strive to do is make the WordPress admin friendly to all people. That means no matter where you are or who you are. Accessibility, they try to make it to where you can use the admin with things like teletype machines for people that are visually impaired. That area is really rough. If anybody has any experience with that, any help will be strongly appreciated. And you can also get into mobile. This is a really cool area to get into. Both the Android and iOS versions of the WordPress app are both open sourced. If you have an interest in mobile, you can still help out with WordPress. If you're interested in learning more, as mentioned earlier, support forums are great. Most people there are nice. IRC is also a good place to go. They use Freenode. If you follow the link, you can find more information. For those of you who are not familiar with IRC, IRC is Internet Relay Chat. It's a chat room, basically, for WordPress communities. WordPress Track, this is where the core project is maintained. We have WordPress Boston 2013 coming up. I actually believe it's being held in this building, but don't quote me on that. It'll be the weekend of October 25th to 27th. One thing that's really great about these WordCamps, they usually are 2 to 3 day events. There is a fee, but it's very minimal, $40, and trust me, you will get your value. That actually goes towards straight operational cost. In fact, it does not even cover it. The WordPress Foundation will actually supplement that. We just need they need a little help to get the event together. As mentioned earlier, the WordPress Boston meetup also meets here last Monday of every month. It's a group about this size. I enjoy it. So, in conclusion, WordPress is a powerful tool for developers. If you can use PHP, you can go ahead and get a giant head start. So many things have already been done with WordPress. You have so many people looking at it that you're going to be hard-pressed to find something that you can be as versatile with and continue to evolve with, for forever. I mean, it's maybe it does have a cap, but WordPress is not slowing down right now. If you look at that trend line, it just keeps going up. That's not to say I would put all your eggs in one basket, but I feel pretty comfortable at the moment. Best of all, you already have everything that you need. The manual's free, the software's free, the community is free, meetups are free. Get involved. There's no reason not to. And lastly, you can find this presentation online tomorrow at slides.stevenword.com, presentations, why WordPress developers should leverage WordPress. If you went there right now, you would see something, but it would not be what you've seen here tonight. I cannot defend that. It was yesterday's versions of the slides.
Questions? Yes.
In regards to that, big lat editor that you said that was on there, right?
Yes.
Will that only work for, in regards to that big Latin editor that you said that was on there, will that only work for actual code? Like, say for instance, I was putting together something on WordPress and I inputted a picture that actually had words in it. It won't change that, right?
No, it's not going to be able to reach inside an image. WordPress has a few functions. The way that you would use this is suppose you had, like let's say that you were creating a slide in PHP, and you wanted to like spit out the word questions. WordPress has a function which is 2 underscores, and then that's actually the name of it, or function name, and parentheses. You just basically wrap that around any word that you wanted to open up to translation. So in this example, you would wrap the word questions in that, and when WordPress runs, it checks that function, will run through every instance that it finds, check those words for a pattern, and replace it if necessary. Is that your question? Yes.
I was wondering, if you have a page that has, say, the main body and then a sidebar, is there a way to have a WYSIWYG editor to be able to edit the content in both those? Right now, the only thing that I've figured out is, a text widget. So I'm just wondering if you can go onto the page and there's more than one WYSIWYG editor.
Okay, so you can have more than one WYSIWYG editor in the WordPress admin. It does have a little bit of a bug in it with some of the JavaScript functions we run to, but the quick answer is yes, you can do that. There's a function in WordPress called the editor, which will basically set up the WYSIWYG editor for you. And anywhere that you can write PHP, a widget being an example, you can use that. Now, widgets natively, I do not know of a way to, for example, take the text widget that comes with WordPress and edit that with the WYSIWYG editor. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's something I have to look into. Yes?
As regards dedicatedness, it's been quite a while since I've done anything with WordPress, but last time was about 5 years ago, and my client came to me and said, I can't bring up the user administration page. When I do that, it dies. So I looked at it, and having a little more software experience than he does, I recognized that it's not dead, it's just slow.
Sometimes with my mic turn off, you guys still hear me? Yeah. Okay. There's not a fantastic answer here. The way that I would approach the question, I would add a hook into the core, make a note of it, and make that one line change. Then I would actually hook into that hook. But I would directly follow that up by going to the core project and making a recommendation that there should be a hook here where there isn't one. That way you can actually get your work folded into the project, and then you don't have to rehack that one line of code every time you update WordPress. However, that method is still vulnerable to the update component. Oh, yeah, it is. Cool. Yeah, I can just hold it. That is your question? Sure.
It's similar, but not identical to the project.
Yeah, and it's one of these things that.
Hello? It's one of these things that is, as you said, has become a lot more mature. There are a lot more actions and filters, and that's a more adopted practice than it was 5 years ago. If you haven't looked at WordPress in the last 5 years, take another look. It's definitely mature to launch. Yes.
I would just mention that's how a lot of those new hooks got in there. Is someone found something they didn't have. They asked Core to add it. It's added now, and now everybody can take advantage.
Yeah, it really is great. If you find an opportunity to do that, don't rush it though, or you can't expect to be rushed. You have to have a little bit of patience. You got to keep in mind that you are affecting all 70 million of those websites when you make a change like that. So people do want to make sure that you've done a good job. Yes.
The namespacing we're talking about, is that separate from PHP version 6 namespacing that's going to be built in, or?
I actually do not have an answer for that. I am probably not qualified to answer that question. I apologize. Kelly is nodding her head yes. So yes.
The namespacing that Steve was talking about is just like calling your functions by a specific name, not the actual PHP namespacing. Unique function.
Yeah, what I mean by that is actually you just want to make sure that you, like for example, I would prefix this with why WordPress and then the name of my function, just so that it always stays unique. And if I was adding a plugin later on, it would not have collision with that function name. Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about caching and in CDN for like that?
Could you talk a little bit about caching and how you might use a CDN or something like that to deploy to a large, high-powered site?
Sure. I'm going to kind of talk about this briefly because this is a gigantic topic. There actually have been a couple of good talks at the WordPress meetups about this. They do come around. Keep your eye on that. So WordPress, there are a couple different ways. You have the object cache, has transients, and you can cache things directly to the file system. All three, or both WP Supercache and W3, allow you to do this. Most of what I work with is storing things in memory. We'll generate a process in the background, and we can reference it later. On some of these really large enterprise-level websites that we work with, some of the processes that we do on the front page, the queries and whatnot, will take like a full minute to run. It's really, really expensive, and you cannot do that when you're having 1,000 people hitting the page. So what we'll do is on the back end, when the editor or the author is creating the article, we'll do all of that processing there. So at the publish post level, we'll start doing our caching. So I guess the best way to explain it is imagine you had a list of recent posts on the front page. When you add a new post, the most recent one is now the one that you just wrote, and you want to update that content. You don't want to run a SQL query every time that is loaded. So what you do is you run the SQL query one time when the article is updated, you store that in memory somewhere, and then you can pull it back out. And if you look through those APIs, you can actually find the code snippets that work with those. It's actually not as complicated as it sounds. It's pretty simple.
Mine's just a simple question about security. Let's say you are hacked. Are there some best practices? I know some of the best practices is to always update your plugins and WordPress itself, but what happens if you are hacked?
Okay, this is a really challenging question. And the reason for that is because without knowing exactly what is occurring, it's really hard to figure out what to do about it. As a general practice, yes, always keep everything up to date. I probably should touch on that a little bit better. It's actually a really excellent point. Usually, when I see the site's been hacked, it's usually some convoluted
code that gets injected into core somewhere. So the first thing I would do is I would open up my file system, and I would sort things by most recent and see what's been edited the most recently. There could be one file in there that's like 10 months newer than the other ones. I would take a look at that and make sure that that's matching the one that comes out of WordPress core. In fact, I would pretty much start by taking a new copy of WordPress core and just dropping it directly on top.
Can I just add to that? Make
Yeah,
sure you
please.
have a working backup system.
Yeah, backups are good for good backups.
Yesterday, just look at that, what changed?
I mean, I was reading something, there was something that was going on in the last 3 months that WordPress and Joomla and I think those two were being attacked. I mean, some people were saying it was going through some of the plugins, maybe Tiny MCE or some other ones.
Maybe Tim
Yeah, Tim had a vulnerability. You know, I think that you're referring to there's a botnet going around, I think back in April and March.
Yeah.
Basically, this is a distributed attack for people not familiar. So if someone, rather than launch a security attack from a single computer, they'll use a bunch of network of infected computers to all attack the same source. As far as I know, the problem there was actually attacking the fact that WordPress, or most people, actually, the default user, the administrative user, used to always be admin. You actually have the ability to change that now. I would say majority of attacks that were looking for that admin user, and then just trying to brute force the password using the bot network. So excellent security practice, change your admin username, and delete the admin user completely. You don't need it as long as you have a user with administrative rights. Yes?
What would you recommend for mobile or responsive design?
Within WordPress? Are you talking like what I would recommend a theme? If you're looking for the responsive, there are a few things that I'm aware of. I'm typically more on the back-end development side, so this is not necessarily my best area. There's actually a theme called responsive. Underscores, the starter theme that I mentioned, I believe has also got some stuff there to handle responsive designs, anything that I made with that. For example, in underscores, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar on mobile devices, you have the white bar across the top, the 3 lines to drop the menu. And then on the desktop side, you will usually have a navigation menu at the top. If you're leveraging underscores, they've already done the JavaScript. They'll handle those 2 things for you. All you have to do is style them. As soon as you drop below a threshold of a width, it'll automatically shrink things down. Yes?
I have a quick success story. My company, this is just a different example of use of WordPress. It isn't something we were talking about. Can you hear me now? My company had an internal website with news and company manual type of stuff and forms and that kind of thing. It had about 1,200 pages, and it was in a CMS that was like literally threatening to burn down the data center. It was just really, really bad. And I took it upon myself with my manager's support I learned WordPress in about, I don't know when I stopped learning WordPress and I started building the site, but by the time it was ready to hand over to the team to start loading content into it, it was about 5 weeks. And this was for a site that has like 1,200 pages and a lot of functionality. And I was really happy that I was able to learn it that easily. Something that I never touched WordPress before that month, and it was a lot of fun. So, you can use WordPress for a lot of different kinds of sites, and it's really easy to get into if you're new to it.
It's a very excellent point, yeah. And the barrier to entry is exceptionally low. If you're brand new into development, especially if you have any PHP background at all, you'll pick it up very quickly. And as I said, you'll continue to learn about it for some time. Yes?
Thank you. So for your company, obviously you work on some very large websites like Nessun and NBC Sports. So my question is, in your opinion, what are some of the most kind of innovative, cutting-edge WordPress websites out there? And then also, my other question is, what do you read to kind of keep up to date with sort of innovative WordPress stuff?
Okay, pretty cool. So, actually, a 2-part question. As far as how to keep up to date, community forums, actually WordPress has a number of blogs that they run. If there's any particular avenue that I'm interested in, I'll usually just keep my eye on that. VIP lobby, which for those of you who don't know, Steph is an automatician, and she's largely involved with the documentation there. And then the first question was, WordPress sites that I find particularly impressive. Now, this is kind of a difficult question. I don't actually have anything coming to mind. You know, a lot of the stuff that we do is media. It's large content. We actually do some really, really cool things with it, but you know, it looks like a newspaper. The stuff that gets done to make those articles appear in the right places can get pretty complicated, but I mean, you are looking at a content vertical. Some of the things that I think are actually the coolest is some of those applications that I mentioned earlier. The capsule, code vault, happy tables. I actually like that idea a lot, using WordPress as a software as a service model. I think that's actually, you're going to see a lot more of that in the future. WordPress.com is all right? Is that good? Yeah, okay. Anybody else?
Is there like a major problem using WordPress and open source software? Because as I was like doing some research, and I'm like completely new with this stuff, but I saw a lot of like scripts on hiding WordPress, and it made me wonder why somebody wanted to hide that fact.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I believe I just heard you say something about this. If somebody knows what you're doing, then they can tailor an attack, right? I mean, if they know what technology you're using, I think that goes with everything. I don't think that's a unique open source. I think that's going to go for everything. If, for example, think about I'm trying to break into a car, right? If I know how to break into a Cadillac, I'm going to have a lot better time with that than I am a Chevrolet, right? It's, if I know that it's what it is to start with, I have the right tools, or I know where to find the right tools. As far as why you would want to hide WordPress, or the presence of it from any other reason, I think it's probably just personal preference. Any more questions? Yep.
Can you speak to any of the frameworks that run on top of WordPress, like Genesis or Thesis, or have you had experience with those, or your thoughts on those?
I have not a lot of experience with them. I'm definitely aware of them. It's not something that I deal with. As kind of mentioned on earlier, I'm usually more on the, like, what I consider back-end code side than the presentation layer. Not that themes are completely presentation, because they're definitely not. What he's talking about is that there's some themes out there. They're called theme frameworks. Genesis, and I'm sorry, what was the other one?
Well, just as an example, Thesis is another big one that I hear a lot of.
Thesis, Carrington. These are all themes that are designed to be built on top of, somewhat in the child theme manner, but it gives you kind of a head start as well. People that use these tend to get pretty comfortable with them, and I think it's also a personal preference. If you decide to pick one of these up and use it, you get familiar with it, I don't see any reason not to use it in the future. It's just not the path that everybody takes. And I'm sorry that I can't answer that.
Just as it relates to hardening, in addition to removing the admin account, are there other things you do, like change mods, circuit directories? I was Googling around to find out, what are standard hardening things you do once you download WordPress.org to make sure you kind of tighten it up?
I mean, me personally, also for the last 2 years, having done work on WordPress.com, they handle all that for us, so it's not something I spend a lot of time doing. When I was doing freelance work, check my file permissions. I mean, pretty common sense stuff. I actually think the biggest vulnerability in the entire process is going to be your plugin directory. I would take a really good look at that. I mean, you can figure out if you go and look at those sanitization and escaping, that actual article will link to other security practices. It's all there. WordPress does a pretty good job of explaining what to do. What I would do is, if you're wondering about a plugin, I would open up that article, see what sanitization and escaping functions look like, look through the plugin you're considering using, and see if they're using best practices. If you come across the first form and it's not doing any of that stuff, you have your answer. Yes?
I was wondering about user accounts. I was wondering about user accounts and roles within WordPress, and if you can have roles that will define that if you have users in a role, then they can only access pages A, B, C, but if you have another role, they can only access, E, F, and G.
And you're wondering if that's possible?
Yes.
Most certainly. So this is one of the APIs in WordPress. It's called the roles and capabilities. What this allows is it basically assigns every user in the system one of a set number of roles. WordPress comes with some of these standard administrator, which is the most, editor, contributor, subscriber, and then you have one that's just like general user that does not log in. Then there are a set of capabilities assigned to those. For example, the administrator can edit a post and so can an editor, but a subscriber cannot. There's actually a capability called like edit post. However, there's not like a lot of exposure in the core WordPress software to look at these visually. There are a few good plugins out there that actually will help you add these. If you are a code person, you can do it at the code level as well. But if you're really looking for something, I want to say it's Role Capability Manager, something like that. If you can hit me up and leave me with some contact information, I can get back to you with what I'm thinking of.
That'd be great, thanks.
Yes.
In your presentation, you went through some of the reasons why you added. Your presentation went through why you added plugins or themes. You talked about taxonomies. You totally lost me at that point.
Okay.
If you could say why you would want to do it and then what it achieves.
Okay, I mean, so where was it, and I realize I totally intend for everybody to have to go back and click on a couple of these things. I do realize that I went very quickly over that, and I do apologize. I wanted to cram in as much as I possibly could. So the reason you want to do that is if you download WordPress itself and you just want to make a very typical website, meaning you have pages, maybe a sidebar, comments, maybe a blog format. The only thing you're really probably going to want to do is take a look at a couple of plugins to extend functionality, maybe get some features that you don't get. An example would be like, what if you wanted a calendar? WordPress doesn't come with like a calendar widget, so you get a plugin that'll handle that for you. Maybe that's crucial to your design. On the theme side, I mean, the idea there is basically just so your website doesn't look like everyone else's. You would be surprised how many websites you will come across that are using 2012, which is the theme that comes with WordPress. I even actually see more often than I should a theme known as Kubrick, which has been in WordPress since the beginning. I don't know why people are still using it. It's probably just that they aren't using that website anymore. As far as custom taxonomies and whatnot, so that's all about expanding functionality. Not everybody is using WordPress to create blogs. So if you were using it in a content management capacity, suppose you were not, I'm going to use e-commerce, and I kind of hate to use this example, it's the one that's coming to mind. If I was trying to build an e-commerce website, I would create a custom, I would want something for my products, a place to enter my products in. Well, Post isn't going to be very good for that. I mean, an article format, a title, and then a WYSIWYG editor isn't going to do that for me. So what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to create a new menu item in that admin on the left called products, and then instead of like the WYSIWYG, I want to have my own fields. I want to have SKU numbers and what color options and what I have. Post types are going to be where you set up that, and then you can assign what's called meta. Meta values are in WordPress. You can think of them as like data associated with that post type. Because all posts all share that same table, they actually have another table that will link to it that stores like values. So if you set the color blue, that's not going to be in the same product or in the same like SQL table as you have your like ID and the name, etc. Taxonomies. In that case, it would be like men's clothing, and so it would be a classification that I could stick that new product in. And now I've created something that absolutely has nothing to do with blogs, and I can display my store's products, and I can do it relatively quickly. Does that clear it up a little? Anyone else have questions? Yes.
So let's say you have other databases that you want to use. How easy is it from WordPress to actually access multiple databases?
Are you talking about, are they all MySQL?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, are you wanting WordPress to like interact with that database, or are you wanting to use that other data, like multiple databases to store default WordPress functionality?
Alternate data that you've collected over a millennium, right?
Okay, I mean, it's PHP. WordPress is PHP. If you look at the database API, there are all sorts of functions in there for interacting with the WordPress database. However, you can still write, manual SQL queries in there and access that database directly, just like you always have. There's nothing that's going to stop you from doing that. At the same time, do take a look. There's one really great object in WordPress called WPDB. Much like the WP query object that I was talking about that's like set up to define the queries, the WPDB is where most of the information for connecting and getting information in and out of the databases is stored. Definitely look through the database API. But the short answer is, yeah, you can interact with anything you want. You can even interact with a different type of database if you wanted to. Bring the data back and then store it where you need. Going once.
let's give him a round of applause. Really nice job. Thanks for coming. So you want to do the raffle for Northeast PHP?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure,
Okay.
why not?
Let me plug in my computer and I'll just show you the very basic code just so everybody knows what's going on, and we'll get to it. Okay, so this is very simple. We have an array called seats, which is an array of letters. It's not, I don't know if you can see this, yeah. It doesn't go all the way to the end because we only have 20 seats, okay? So we're gonna assume that that seat all the way over there is seat A, okay? And this seat right here is seat T, all right? And then we have 11 rows of seats. Well, we actually only have really 7. We have those in the back which are mostly empty. So I have a favor to ask you, sir. It might be more efficient to eliminate that, right? Because we might get a whole bunch of, yeah, so let's change this, okay? So this array here was going up to 11. We've now changed that to 7, okay? So seat A is there, seat T is there, row number 1 is here, row 7 is all the way in the back, okay? So there's a more efficient way to get this array. You could have used the range function to fill in the gaps, but I figured this was a little more explicit for demonstration purposes. So what this is going to do is output the seat, followed by a comma, followed by the row, and then a line break. Are we ready? Great. All right. So whoever whoever ends up winning. Sorry, something else. Bear with me 1 second. Just clear this out. So whoever ends up winning, just come up and give me your email address or whatever contact information you want to use, and we'll set you up in the database and send you the ticket. Okay? So here we go. Drum roll. So I'm just running this straight from the command line. And we have D6. Okay, so second to last row. Row 6, second to last. Randy, I think you're in that row. Yep, it's your row. And then it's number... It's D, so it's A, B, C, D. So it's the 4th person in. It's you? Are you in that seat? All right. So just catch me right after this and we'll set you up. Are you free August 16th through 17th? Or 16th through 18th?
I have 2 people that would be interested.
All right, perfect. Okay, let's do it one more time. C6. Same row. That's an empty seat, I think, right? E1. So first row right here, A, B, C, D, E, so it's 5 people in. Is there a bag in that seat? Or is that an empty seat? Empty seat? Actually, while I have everybody's attention and the suspense is high, I remembered I have a note to tell everybody about Northeast PHP because somebody came up and asked me a question, so I can tell you now. We put an event on our meetup site for Northeast PHP, and if you go there, you'll see it, and it'll say this event is full, and there's 1 attendee, and it's me. So this is a little bit of a hack, okay? So we put it up there just to kind of catch the eyeballs on our meetup site, but you can't sign up there because it's a different process. But unfortunately, Meetup just requires this RSVP to be there, so please If you see it on the meetup site, the event is not full, just go to northeastphp.com and you can buy the ticket. So here we go. J5. So fifth row, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay. Gentleman in the yellow shirt is in the fifth row. And who's J? A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. So it's 9 people in, it's an empty seat. Yeah.
You should have made us all move.
Why not empty yet?
Here we go. I have a good feeling about this. A1.
A1.
I thought somebody was there. Okay. J5 again.
Oh, randomness is getting questioned here.
I can show the code again if you want to see it.
That's actually him. Everybody was disagreeing with me, but that's J5. His seat is J5.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Hey, congratulations. Thank you, Bob. All right. So just come up to me right now, we'll get it. So thank you everybody for coming. Hopefully we'll see you in August at Northeast PHP, or we'll see you in September and every other month after that. Great to see everybody. Thank you.